District and Deputy Program Division Director for the Office of Human and Animal Food Operations East, Division 1 with FDA. He was called to active duty in 2008 in the Biologics and Bioresearch Monitoring Programs. In 2014, he deployed to the Monrovia Medical Unit in Liberia in support of the Ebola mission. And he currently serves as the Administration Finance Deputy Section Chief on RDF 1. Lieutenant Commander Palo received his Bachelor's of Science in Biomedical Engineering from the Georgia Institute of Technology, and he is currently enrolled in the Global Health Graduate Certificate Program at USIS.
I'm going to try my best not to stand in one place because I'm wary of the topic I'm about to embark on. So I'm going to talk today about the federal budget cycle. I think it's something that's fairly relevant right now, and it's a very left turn from engineering, but I think it's incredibly important when it comes to leadership, especially leadership in the federal government. So as we want to start talking about executive leadership, this is something that we really need to talk about. So real quick disclaimer, these are my views. These are not the views of the department, the Public Health Service, the Commission Corps, the US government. I'm not a lawyer, I'm just a nerd. So I've made every attempt to make sure that the content in here is correct and accurate, but if something is inaccurate, there's no guarantee. So real quick with my objectives, I want to make sure that before the end of this talk, that you understand the major stakeholders and the overall timeline in the federal budget cycle. I also want to talk about the various budget instruments that are created during the budget cycle, some of the terminology that is used, that is misused, that is mixed up. And I really want to describe the impact of the President's budget proposal and what that means on the programs that we work in. So many of you know me, I really like memes, so I'm trying to break it up a little bit, but I had to throw this one in here. But if I can just get a show of hands, how many of you in the room manage a personal budget? Okay. How many of you manage it for a month at a time? A year at a time? How many do it more than 1 year at a time? Okay. How many people, raise your hands again, do you think, how many federal budgets do you think the federal government manages at any one time? How many think it's one year? Raise your hand. 2 years? 3 years? Oh, that's good. So at any given time, the federal government is managing, actively managing 3 different budget years. So everyone should know, if you don't, the fiscal year starts on October 1st and ends on September 30th. The calendar year is the calendar year. So right now we're in fiscal year 19, which, easy way to remember it, is the fiscal year number means that it ends September 30th of that number. So it ends September 30th this year. We're executing FY19's budget, killing it, stabbing it, doing everything we can to spend the money that the Congress has given us. But you see here for FY 2020, it says presenting. So we're presenting, defending, justifying what we want to start spending on October 1st of this year to the Congress. But we're also now thinking about 2021. How are we going to formulate, what plans do we want to start doing for the money we want to start spending on October 1st of 2020? We're doing that now in May of 2019. So what does this mean? I'll use this as a kind of a real world example. So I want you to think of these phases here. This happens for every fiscal year. We have a planning phase for the Office of Management and Budget. They have a review phase, the budget's released, and then we have the congressional phase. So let's use the example of the PHS funding, which doesn't really exist, but it's spread across the various government. So in June of last year, for those of us that were here and for them we heard the ASH's priorities for the Corps. So what did that mean? That meant that actually starting in October, but June to around January 2019, they were formulating the budget for what we wanted to start spending on October 1st of this year. They started it June of last year, even earlier than that. In March of this year, the President released his budget proposal. So he said, hey, these are my priorities. This is what I want the federal government to spend its time and money on. He released that in March of this year for a fiscal year that starts in October. So just kind of keep these timelines. It started in June, still talking about October 1st. And now we're seeing Secretary Azar, the various cabinet secretaries, bureau and agency heads, they're going before the Congress and they're saying, hey, this is why I think this is a good idea to spend this money or not spend this money, which can get kind of awkward when you talk about eliminating a program and then people get upset about it. But these, yeah.
March of 2019, the president's budget
Was an exception, yes. It is, why, so I'll talk a little bit, thank you, sir, for reminding me about talking point. Why are we on this cycle? Well, it's because we passed a law in the Congress in the 20s that talked about how we do the federal budget. So that's what set the fiscal year. The budget is supposed to come out the first week of February. It didn't come out because of the government shutdown. OMB was closed, they weren't allowed to release it. So that is an abnormality, but normally it comes around until February. So these are your major players. You have your agency budget staff. They do a lot of different things, but when it comes to the actual budget process, they're the ones that provide the proposals to the Office of Management and Budget to meet the agency mission. And there are some things that we do because the Congress passed a law that says we have to do it. I use an example for FDA because that's where I work. Every 3 years, I have to inspect every high-risk food facility, whether I have money or not. That's what the law says. Then you have the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, big OMB. Think of OMB when you hear the White House released the budget. It was OMB that released the budget. They're in the executive office of the White House. So they're doing a lot of things when it comes to the budget request. They are generating the actual document that gets released to the public and issued to the Congress. And they are monitoring how we spend our money to make sure that we're only spending money that we have been appropriated. Then you have your cabinet secretaries and your agency bureau heads. They're the ones that are defending how we want to spend the money based on what the president said. But you really have the Congress, and this kind of goes back to what Commander Yancey said. The Congress has the power of the purse. They got that from the Constitution. They're the ones in charge of our money. No one else. It's them. The president can ask what he wants, but it's up to the Congress to decide. So when I asked you to raise your hand and said, how many of you manage a budget? You were probably thinking, how much money comes in, how much money goes out, I can only spend so much. For the federal budget process and cycle, budget isn't used in a plain language way. You really have to think about it as a process that contains many different things. So we start with the budget request that comes from the president. It's not a law. It's not anything the Congress has to agree to. It's what the president wants. You have a budget resolution, another key important item that's passed by the Congress, by the House, by the Senate. Sometimes they agree, oftentimes they don't. And that says this is the most amount of money we're going to be willing to spend for a certain period of time. So we're operating right now under a budget resolution that expires at the end of this year. Then you have authorizing laws. So go back to the budget resolution. Does the president have to sign that? No. You have authorizing legislation. Those are laws. That's things like we're authorized to have a ready reserve. It's in the law. Does it give any money? No. Just says you can do that, but we're not going to give you any money to do it. Where's the money come from? Appropriations. That's what most people probably think about when they hear the budget, is they really think of the appropriations. So it's important for everyone who's going to take on a leadership role to understand the differences in these terms and how they're all used in the news, in the media, as the budget. So ideally, we have regular appropriations. Congress does what they're supposed to. All 12 subcommittees get together. They pass the funding for HHS. They pass the funding for agriculture. That includes the FDA. Sometimes they rush it together. They pass what we call an omnibus, which includes everything. And you hear about how much they hate that because it's like this thick, no one really knows what's in it. And then often we have continuing resolutions. And we all hate those for anyone that does budget planning because it says, you're stuck in time for a certain amount of time and we'll get to you later. We often hear something that talks about the president's budget request is dead on arrival. But who is it dead on arrival to? It's dead on arrival, sure, to the Congress. We'll hear that, they're just going to ignore it. It doesn't matter what the president's budget request says. Sort of. That's true for the Congress, but it's not dead on arrival for which branch of the government? Where we work, the executive. So the agencies have to defend the proposal that the administration put forward because the agencies are part of that administration. So they are going to follow the president's priorities, and they're going to use that when we plan for the upcoming fiscal year. So I showed this to you again because right now we are in calendar year 19. We're presenting for fiscal year 20, but we don't have a budget for fiscal year 20 yet. So we're using the president's priorities that were issued in March to plan for something that's happening in October, that's starting in October. So the president's budget request is really what kind of impacts the federal programs and some of the language here. So presidential priorities are shared by the cabinet secretaries. Do we know why? Who appointed the cabinet secretaries? The president. They're appointed by supported by the other political appointees and leaders in the administration. So that's pretty straightforward. They're also used by budget staffs to plan our programs. I'll use my agency as an example again. Because the president released the budget request for fiscal year 2020, we are now work planning for fiscal year 2020 based on the numbers in the president's request. And these priorities have to be followed by the executive agencies until appropriations are passed. So I'll give a very timely example, and hopefully I don't get myself in trouble. And if I'm absolutely incorrect by any of the senior leaders in the room, please correct me. We heard yesterday that the Corps is going to increase to 7,500 officers in 5 years or so. Did anyone catch when the ASH said, I was able to take the draft watermark off this document? What did we hear last year? We didn't hear that the Corps was going to increase. Why did we hear that? Because the Office of Management and Budget had language that said the Corps was going to decrease. What was in the 2020 budget request? Did it have that language? No. That's an example of the administration supporting the administration priorities. So, was that budget request dead on arrival to us? No. That's one example that was just very timely that happened to come up yesterday. So what happens?
Excuse me, I don't think that was a budget request because we're not talking about money yet.
Yeah. I'm speaking specifically about reducing language that reduces versus language that's missing.
Yeah, we're talking about language.
Yeah, language.
Not
Not money, just language. But as an example of how language in a document contains instructions for the executive departments. So who has the final say? Who? The Congress. So Congress has the final say. Sometimes appropriations can vary differently from what the president requests. This happens all the time. This isn't unique to this administration. It won't be unique to the next. It wasn't unique to the last. So sometimes appropriations can contain specific instructions. You might have the president say, I want my administration to spend money on X. I don't want to spend money on Y. And the Congress will say, we really like Y, so don't spend any money on X. That happens. But what happens when the appropriations contain significantly different language from what the request in February of that year contained? Sometimes it's very minor things, so it doesn't require a lot of tweaking, but sometimes it can really hamper an agency's ability to recruit if they were planning to not be able to recruit. Sometimes it can cause a surge in recruitment because they suddenly got extra money and they want to be able to spend it while they still have appropriations. But this is something too that I want everyone to understand. It's unfortunately fairly timely, but when can we spend money? When can the federal government spend money? Once it's appropriated. So you can only spend money that's been appropriated. If you spend money that's not been appropriated, you violate a law that many of you may have never heard about until January of this year, or in the last shutdown. So it's something called the AntiDeficiency Act. So it's just something to keep in mind that, with some exceptions, the Commission Corps, the way it's functioned is one of those exceptions. You can't obligate money, which includes pay and salary, unless it's been appropriated by the Congress. So why did I think this was an important talk? Why should you guys care? You know, this is one of the things that, as a citizen, we should all really understand this process. I think the citizenry in general would be better served if everyone took the time to understand how the federal government, because it all comes down to the money. Where does our money come from? How are we spending our money? It's all about the money. So if we understood how that process worked, I think we'd be better served, and we'd be able to hold our government more accountable to the things that the population would like. But it's also important for us as Commission 4 officers and leaders in public health. Right now, you may be a junior officer who is, all you're doing is executing the budget. You don't realize it. You're doing inspections, you're operating a facility contract, you're operating a power plant at NIH, you're executing the money that the Congress has appropriated for that function. But you should understand why you did that, because that same money is also written to performance plans. So every year, every agency has a performance plan with the Office of Management and Budget, right? They're the ones that look at how we spend our money. They say, we're giving you this money, we want to get this outcome. So it's important for you to tie that, because maybe you were told you have to do 20 inspections this fiscal year, or you're not going to get a 4 on your core. You're going to get a low score on your core. Well, why did that come about? Well, that's because in your performance plan is supporting someone else's performance plan, is supporting someone else's performance plan, which supports the agency's performance plan to the Office of Management Budget, because that's going to give you money. So that's why you should care. It helps, it's kind of the so what to some of what we do, but it's also important as we build leadership that we've been tasked to do by Admiral Deezer, by the Surgeon General. To understand this process early on, I think helps you realize from the work that you're doing, you can better support that as you move up in management and as you move up in leadership. And it's really a prerequisite to good leadership. So where do you find out more? I think it's really important for everyone to know where to read the budget. Where do you read the budget proposals? You may not want to read the real thick documents, so open it in PDF, Control F, the program you work for. Control F, the commission courts. First thing I did when the budget release was requested, I wanted to know what it said. Found my little paragraph. But don't just read the White House budget, read the department's budget. Read your agency's budget. Read the document. You don't have to read the whole thing, but scroll through, see what the administration is planning for you to do the next year, and kind of be engaged in that process. A lot of times, for a big program like the Department of Defense, everyone knows who the Department of Defense is, so when you say, we're going to cut anything in the Department of Defense, Congress goes, no, we're not doing that, I like it. When you have a program that no one really knows about, usually what gets funded is what's in the request. The same thing though, if no one knows about it and it's not in the request, it's probably not going to get in there. So it's important for you to be able to advocate. If you know about this, you can advocate on your own time as a private citizen, on your own devices, whatever you want, to your leaders to say, hey, this program is important to me, or I don't really understand why we're spending money on this, but you'll never know if you don't know and go look at it. So every department has on their homepage their budget documents, and all you have to do is go to hhs.gov and scroll to the very bottom, there's a link that says budget. If you go to dod.gov, you scroll to the bottom, I think it might be defense.gov. Scroll to the bottom, there's a link that says budget. So I think it's really important for everyone to not only know this, but to share it with your colleagues, to talk to your supervisors, say, hey, did you see this coming up? To really better prepare yourselves for the leadership that we're going to be expected to take on moving forward. I think I've gotten us back on time. Does anyone have any questions?
What basically happens when there's a month, 6 months maybe, of a CR, how does that affect the spending of the budget?
So that's actually one of the worst case scenarios when it comes to spending money. What will happen is your fiscal year starts on October 1st no matter what and ends on September 30th no matter what. So when you end up on a continuing resolution that goes until March, and then you don't get your regular appropriation until March 1st, instead of having 12 months to spend that money, now you have 6 months or 7 months to spend that money. So you weren't allowed to execute that contract, to plan, compete, do anything. So when you say, oh yeah, we're gonna get $1 million towards this project, you needed that $1 million on October 1st. You didn't need it on April 1st because then it's too late. You don't have time to spend the money. And that looks even worse because you say, hey, agency, you asked for all this money, we gave it to you, you didn't spend it. You go, well, you didn't spend it because you didn't give me the 12 months I needed to spend it.
Just want to tweak that a little bit. So
Yeah.
it's with your continuing resolutions, that's correct for new money.
New money.
That's correct for new money. So with the continuing resolution, what you do is they normally cap you and hold you at the current year's, the previous year's funding levels. It basically just keeps you, it keeps the doors open, keeps the lights on. It doesn't appropriate any new money. So if you have a new project or a new initiative, or anything, then you're correct. Then it puts you behind the power curve as far as executing it, getting the contracts out. Existing contracts will typically let you maintain whatever your steady state is. So that's how we actually get to, because otherwise we won't go to work. Right? So it allows you to go to work and continue to move things at the current pace. So don't want you to miss that.
No, thank you.
That's excellent. I've already reached to Sam. You're going to do that for PPAC. Just so you know. You're going to do that presentation for